Welcome to the Female Church Leaders Podcast, a weekly resource for women who love God, love the church, and are called to lead. I'm your host, Kadi Cole, church leader, author, and executive coach. After more than 30 years in full-time ministry, often as the only woman at the table, I understand how meaningful yet challenging your calling can be. That's why I created this podcast, to remind you that you're not leading alone. Each week, I'll share practical tools, biblical insights, and honest encouragement for the real challenges female leaders face in ministry, so you can grow your skills, strengthen your faith, and lead with more confidence and joy without burning out or striving to prove yourself. We drop a new episode every Monday because Sunday is coming and you are going to be ready for it. There is something almost every one of us says we want, and yet we quietly avoid it. I'm talking about feedback, not encouragement, not applause, not a random, you did great. I mean actual, constructive, specific leadership feedback. And if we're honest, there's a good reason we avoid it. It feels risky. Risky to our confidence, risky to our reputation, risky to that quiet internal voice that whispers, am I actually any good at this? But here's the truth. Leaders don't plateau because they lack calling. They plateau because they stop getting honest input. And if we're going to continue to grow in leadership, we have to learn how to receive feedback and how to give it. Research from Harvard Business Review consistently shows that leaders who receive specific, actionable feedback improve performance significantly faster than those who do not. Clarity around your performance actually reduces anxiety, and specificity builds skill sets. However, multiple workplace studies show that female leaders are more likely to receive what's known as, quote, vague praise. Now, vague praise sounds something like this: nice job, or you're doing good with a thumbs up, or my personal favorite, your hair looks great today. I mean, which to be honest, as a lifelong struggling curly girl, I don't mind that one that much, but it doesn't help me in my leadership. Now, on the other hand, men are more likely to receive task-based constructive feedback. Slow your pace, strengthen that close, be more direct in the meeting. One builds confidence temporarily, the other builds competency long-term. And leaders want to grow. Even the most confident among us know we don't have this thing fully figured out yet. But without constructive feedback, our minds often fill in the gaps with assumptions. Well, I guess that was my only chance to do that. I probably blew it. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. And none of those conclusions are reliable. I remember the first time I led a ministry moment during weekend services. I had spent hours working on my illustration. It had something to do with the key to my jewelry box, but that's about all I can remember now. But man, I worked on it for a long time. But despite my preparation, when I got up there, it felt like I rambled. The audience was not with me, and I basically made a fool of myself. I walked up the stage convinced that was the last time I would ever do that again. I went to our campus pastor, Doug, who was an incredible mentor to me, and I confessed, I do not think I should do that again. I think so-and-so should do the next service. He looked completely confused at me. What are you talking about? He said. That was really good. It actually baffled him why I wanted to tap out, but he didn't let me quit. And here's what I learned that day. Judging yourself based solely on how it felt is wildly unreliable. Performance adrenaline distorts perception. I still struggle with this. But Romans 12:3 tells us not to jump to conclusions irrationally, but to think of ourselves with what he calls sober judgment. Sober judgment, my friends, is rarely self-generated. It requires other people's perspectives. That moment changed how I approached feedback. Instead of withdrawing and evaluating my performance solely on how I felt, I started asking other people for their honest opinions. Not, was that okay? But what's one thing I could improve for next time? And that single question changes everything. It changed it in me, and it also changed the kind of feedback I started to receive. In many ministry settings, especially if you're doing a solid job, feedback can be surprisingly quiet. No news can feel like good news, at least at first. For a while, it can be comforting, but over time, silence limits growth. If you're not receiving specific feedback, you may need to initiate it. Start with people who are clearly for you, people who want to see you grow, people who can tell the difference between personal preference and leadership development. Now, if this is new territory, you don't have to ask your entire leadership team what they think of you. Choose just one trusted person and try something simple like, what's one thing I could do to strengthen next time? Where do you see the most room for growth? If I wanted to take my leadership to the next level, what would that look like? Notice the posture of these questions. They're specific. They're growth-oriented. They assume there will be a next time. Another often overlooked opportunity is your annual performance review. Many leaders receive a list of goals or growth areas, but then nothing. It's crickets. So this meeting is actually your official moment to come prepared to ask, How would you recommend I grow in these areas? Is there training, a conference, or coaching that would help me? Is there budget available to support my development? Growth areas without resourcing creates frustration, but growth areas with a plan creates momentum. Receiving feedback well requires humility, but it also requires initiative. And taking initiative, especially on behalf of your own honest development, is a mark of leadership maturity. Now, let's turn the mirror around, because if you lead people, you are also responsible not just for receiving feedback, but also for giving it. And this is where things can get really uncomfortable. Many leaders hesitate to give constructive feedback because they don't want to create awkwardness. They don't want to damage a relationship. They don't want to seem overly critical. But unclear leadership is not helpful leadership. Research consistently shows that vague praise feels good in the moment, but specific feedback drives measurable improvement. Harvard Business Review has repeatedly demonstrated that high-performing teams are built on clarity, not on comfort alone. See, passive feedback creates confusion. Aggressive feedback erodes trust, but clear, forward-facing feedback builds both skill and confidence. And this is where one of the most powerful 5-word phrases in leadership comes in. Next time you do this. Those 5 words change everything. Next time you do this. They communicate belief. They assume growth. They say, I see you doing this again. You are far from done. So instead of, well, that didn't land very well, try next time you do this. Slow down the second point so people can follow you. Instead of, that was kind of confusing, try next time, tighten your opening so your main idea is clearer. Forward-facing language turns critique into formation. It says you're capable, you're growing, I'm invested in your development. And that is how leaders multiply. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Iron sharpening iron is not, well, gentle. There is friction, there is resistance, there is heat, because the goal here is precision. And just a few verses later, Proverbs 27:6 says, wounds from a friend can be trusted, not because they feel good, but because they are rooted in love. If we only receive praise, we grow shallow. If we only receive criticism, we grow discouraged. But when we receive honest, loving feedback, we grow strong. Healthy, humble leaders stay coachable and courageous enough to coach others. So here's your action step for this week. Ask one trusted person for a specific piece of forward-facing feedback. Not, how did I do, but what's one thing I can strengthen for next time? And if you lead others, practice the 5-word phrase. Next time you do this, and then give your clear, honest, constructive advice. Feedback is not rejection. It's refinement. And refinement is what allows leaders to grow beyond their current capacity. If this episode stretched you, our theological cheat sheet is a helpful next step. It brings clarity to some of the theological tensions that often sit underneath our hesitation, especially around leadership voice, authority, and growth. You can get it at the link in our show notes or under resources at kadiecole.com. Great job learning to lead with sober judgment and steady confidence. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. And we are here to cheer you on. I'm so glad we got to spend this time together on the Female Church Leaders Podcast. I hope you're walking away encouraged, equipped, and reminded that your calling truly matters. To keep growing, join us for our next Closing the Leadership Gap cohort at closingtheleadershipgap.com. It's a guided coaching experience, including live Q&A with me, designed to accelerate your leadership journey. If this podcast has been helpful to you, would you please take a moment to follow, rate, and share it? Your engagement helps the algorithms suggest our resources to female church leaders we haven't had a chance to meet yet. And don't forget to follow at Female Church Leaders on Instagram for encouragement and leadership tools designed just for you. You can also follow my personal feed at Kadi Cole, spelled Kadiicole. Keep leading faithfully, keep growing your leadership gifts, and I'll see you next Monday because Sunday is coming and you are going to be ready for it.